Somewhere along your path, maybe after a deep insight or a breakdown that cracked something open, you felt a shift. You saw through it all, the noise, the patterns, the endless chasing. And then there was silence. At first it felt powerful, even freeing, but slowly, without you noticing, something faded. Not in a big dramatic way, quietly, like life turned down the volume and no one remembered to turn it back up. You stopped chasing, you stopped caring. Not in a careless or reckless way, just in that soft, tired way, like an exhale that never quite ends. And then a question starts to whisper, why do I feel so numb now that I finally see the truth? This is the strange paradox. We expect awakening to light us up, to bring passion, purpose, peace. But for many, especially the sensitive ones, the deep thinkers, the seekers, it doesn't feel like that. It feels empty. I remember a friend telling me her story. She was wise, tuned in, always reading the right books. Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. After a long, dark period, she had a big awakening. She said she saw through the illusion of ego, of chasing success, of pretending. But 2 months later, she was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. She told me, I used to cry over not doing enough. Now I don't care if I do anything at all. I thought awakening would light me up, not leave me like this. Carl Jung spoke about this long before it became common to talk about. He didn't use spiritual language, but he understood what happens when the unconscious starts to wake up. He said, enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That sounds beautiful, until you realize what it means. Awakening isn't the end. It's the beginning of a kind of death. Not physical, but psychological. The death of the identity you clung to, the roles, the goals, even your sense of time and direction. And yet, your ego isn't gone. It's just lost. It no longer knows where it fits. And without that map, drive disappears. So it's not that you're broken, you're not lazy, you're not even depressed in the usual sense. You're in between. You've stepped out of something, but you haven't yet stepped into what comes next. And this space, this limbo, isn't a mistake. It's part of the process. It's ancient and sacred. Jung warned us about this part, this quiet, in-between phase that the modern world does everything to avoid. The pause, the void, that strange space between who you were and who you're becoming. He believed it was vital, not a mistake, not something to rush through, but a sacred part of the journey. He called it individuation, the slow, often painful process of becoming your true self. Not the self others wanted you to be, not the one shaped by roles or approval, but the real you, underneath all of it. No one really talks about this stage, the part after the awakening, the fog, the numbness, the strange sense that nothing matters anymore, even though everything used to. That's what we're going to explore next, because what's happening inside you right now isn't a breakdown. It's a deep inner shift, and this loss of motivation you're feeling, it might actually be your biggest spiritual upgrade, if you understand what it really is. But before we go deeper, if you're someone who's drawn to these kinds of questions, if you find yourself wanting to understand life beneath the surface, you're not alone. Fractal wisdom exists for that very reason, to give words to the invisible, to support those walking the strange and beautiful path of awakening. So if you're in that fog right now, if you're feeling heavy, unmotivated, like your spark has vanished, I want you to know, you're not broken, you're changing, and not just a surface change, a full system reboot. The way you saw the world, the way you measured success, the way you stayed busy just to feel alive. It's all being rewritten. The goals you used to chase, the lists, the plans, the constant need to achieve, they don't speak to you anymore. Not because you failed, but because that version of you, the one who needed them, is fading. The old fuel no longer works because the old engine is gone. Jung understood this long before any of it became trendy. He saw how our motivation is tied to the ego, the persona, the mask we wear to play our part in the world. For most of your life, that mask gave you direction. You wanted to succeed, be liked, be seen. It wasn't wrong, it was just how human development works. But awakening removes the mask. Suddenly you see the game. And once you see the game, it's hard to keep playing it. Your old goals no longer fit. They were built for someone you're not anymore. It's like being an actor who walked off stage, and suddenly the script doesn't make sense. You're not sure what role you're supposed to play now. That's why motivation fades. Not because you've lost your fire, but because you're no longer feeding it with who you used to be. And that's not failure. It's transformation. Carl Jung didn't believe we were here to serve the ego. He believed we're here to integrate it, to bring it into alignment with something deeper, something much bigger. He called that process individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not by chasing perfection, but by bringing all the parts of yourself together, even the ones you've hidden, rejected, or outgrown. Not the small self that craves praise or attention, but the deeper self, the quiet center within you that feels connected to everything. This self isn't chasing status or certainty. It's here to express what's real. So when awakening happens, your inner system starts to shift. You start to reject anything that feels fake, forced, or tied to ego. That can mean jobs, relationships, goals that once felt inspiring, like the dream board you made back in 2021. That's why awakening feels both freeing and disorienting. It cracks something open. But Jung warned, if we stop here, we get stuck. Some people awaken and then fall into a trap. They start to believe that none of it matters, that everything's just illusion. So they disconnect, float, numb out. They call it detachment, but it's really disengagement. It's checking out. But your deeper self doesn't want to check out. It wants to live through you, not to escape the world, but to bring something sacred into it. This self doesn't reject life. It redefines your place in it. But to step into that, you have to pass through something strange, something Jung described perfectly. But most people don't realize they're in it until they're already through it. It's a phase no one really talks about. It's not glamorous. It won't go viral on social media. It doesn't look like writing poetic captions or meditating in Bali. It looks like this, sitting in silence, unable to explain what's happening inside you while the world rushes on around you. Jung would say, you're not lost. You're in between. You've stepped away from the ego, but you haven't yet found a new way to live from the soul. And that space, it's not failure. It's a rite of passage. But in a world obsessed with progress and performance, stillness is seen as laziness. Silence gets labeled as giving up. So you judge yourself. And that judgment, it blocks the very energy your soul is trying to call back. Jung had a word for this sacred pause, enantiodromia. It means a turning into the opposite. When something goes too far in one direction, it eventually swings back the other way. So after years of ego-driven striving, you awaken and swing into stillness. You go from I must do everything to why do anything at all? And that swing isn't weakness. It's sacred. It's how balance begins to return. In myths and ancient wisdom, this part of the journey is known as the hermit phase, the death before rebirth. It's the moment the caterpillar melts inside the cocoon. Not yet a butterfly, no longer a caterpillar, just goo. And goo doesn't get things done. It doesn't hustle. It doesn't strive. It dissolves. This is where the ego starts to panic. It wants clarity. It wants progress. It wants to do something. But your deeper self is whispering, let go. I'm building something deeper than you've ever known. And here's the thing. This is where most modern spirituality skips over the hard part. It tells you, just follow your joy. High vibes only. Stay positive. But Jung would say, if you avoid the darkness, you also miss the gold. He believed the shadow, the hidden, uncomfortable parts of you, aren't obstacles. They're the very path to becoming whole. Not optional, not extra credit. This is the core of the human journey. So if you're feeling empty right now, if you're stuck in that sacred stillness, you're not broken. You're becoming. This nothingness you feel, it's where the unconscious finally has space to rise. Your psyche, wise beyond words, will stall your motivation, your clarity, even your drive on purpose. not to punish you, but to slow you down long enough to feel what you've been avoiding, to witness, to reclaim, to remember. This is the real work. And here's the quiet, beautiful twist. When you stop fighting the void, when you stop resisting the stillness, something begins to shift. Motivation starts to return, but not in the way it used to. It's not anxious. It's not about proving anything. It's not hustle energy. It feels older, quieter, like a memory your soul is gently calling back. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not just as a concept, but as a living, breathing compass inside you. You've passed through the void. You've sat in the silence. You've allowed the old to dissolve. And now something new is starting to stir. Not loud, not dramatic, more like a quiet inner pull. Not to go back to the life you had, but to build a life that fits who you've become. This is where the self begins to speak, not in words, but in nudges, in symbols, in subtle resonance. Jung called this the symbolic life, a life guided not by the ego's plans, but by the deep wisdom of the soul. Because once the ego has surrendered and the unconscious has been integrated, we begin to live from a place deeper than personality. And that's when life stops being about survival and starts being about meaning. And here's the part no one really expects. It's often beautifully ordinary. When the self begins to lead, you don't hustle, you respond. You're no longer pushed by fear or urgency. You're moved by alignment, by what quietly feels right. You stop chasing clarity. You start recognizing it when it arrives, gently, naturally. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll wake up every day bursting with energy or motivation. You'll still have moments of tiredness, of not knowing, of feeling too much. But what fades is that quiet, constant self-betrayal, that feeling of dragging yourself through a life that no longer fits your soul. Instead, you begin to notice a different kind of pull. You start creating without needing an audience. You say no to what looks good but feels wrong. You follow curiosity, not checklists. You choose peace over performance. This is the new fuel. It's not driven by adrenaline. It's guided by alignment. Carl Jung called this living symbolically, not escaping into fantasy, but tuning into the quiet language of the soul. Your dreams, your inner images, the strange timing of life, the gut feelings, they start becoming your compass. So what does this really look like? Sometimes it's as simple as asking different questions. Instead of, what should I do? You ask, what's quietly calling me? Instead of, what's the plan? You ask, where is life gently nudging me? Instead of, how do I prove myself? You ask, what feels honest, real, alive? You stop trying to control life and begin participating in it. And no, this doesn't mean you give up your ambition. It means you transform it. Ambition becomes devotion to truth, to growth, to presence. And here's the paradox. This kind of energy, it moves mountains, but now it's sustainable. Now it's soul-powered. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. And it leads you to create, to serve, to teach, to build. Not because you should, but because your whole being says yes. So if you've been feeling like your fire has gone out, maybe it's just the old fire that burned away. So a deeper flame could finally rise. One that doesn't flicker just because the outside world shakes. Carl Jung never promised this would be easy. But if you're still listening, you're already walking the path. It's not about finding your old motivation again. It's about discovering a new one, rooted in truth, not performance. This isn't the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming. If this spoke to you, if it helped put words to something you've been quietly holding, drop a comment below. Let me know where you are on this path. And if you want more content like this, real, grounded, soul-deep psychology and wisdom, subscribe to the Mindscape. Because awakening isn't the end of the story. It's where the real story begins.